So this time is in the Christian world, of course, is Christmas time, and then New Year's, and so these events. Christmas now is kind of the international celebration, and so you see Santa Claus and plastic snow in Bangkok. It's a time where there's in the world the population pressures, the environmental problems, and there's no end to the conditions that we live on this planet are somehow changing in a way that can be rather threatening and frightening to people. And of course, the tendency of the human mind is to dwell on what's wrong and worry and anxiety about the future. And so just to point out, like the thinking mind, is important to really get some perspective on thinking, because that is a function we have that we're very bound into. We tend to experience our lives through perceptions, conditioned perceptions and words and concepts. And so but when you really examine thinking as the habit of thinking, it's a critical function. Thinking is what they call dualistic. It divides everything up, and so this is good, this is bad, right, wrong, good's better, best, bad, worse, and then we differentiate, we discriminate. This is red, blue, and yellow, a man, a woman, and then we have various cultural attitudes about gender, about class, about religion and politics, and that we have, just part of a cultural conditioning we get from the family we're born into. So then the mindfulness is, of course, the way that we begin to get perspective on thinking, because when you think about thinking, you're just caught in the whirlpool of thinking, and so to get beyond thought is through mindfulness, and then to be able to objectify the thinking process. So you're looking at it not through views about it, but just observing how it works, like the proliferating tendency, the way the mind, when you start thinking, or something stimulates a feeling, and then you think, and it goes off into this conceptual proliferation, or papancha, or pungdang in Thai. So this is like just notice how grammar works, English grammar. So one word connects to another, and these are patterns that we learn, from when we're learning the language. And so then we have various cultural assumptions that we all have from being, attitudes about life and what's important, what isn't, what's right and wrong, according to particular cultural conditioning that we have. So these are infinitely variable, and then we think about them as right or wrong, good or bad. But to get outside of that dualistic trap and the only way we can really do it is with mindfulness. So then mindfulness, sati, sampajanya, satipanya, these words are very significant. These are the kind of essence of Buddha's teachings. This is what's so unique about it, is that the emphasis, the importance the Buddha gave on sati sampajanya and panya, wisdom. So that because in other religious conventions, the doctrinal positions usually start from I believe in God, or a statement, a kind of metaphysical belief, or about an ultimate reality, and then the Buddha never did that. He started from an existential reality such as suffering, dukkha, and just notice the difference. Like you're talking about universal love. That's an inspiring concept, isn't it? Like we must love each other, and unconditioned love, universal love, is an all-embracing ideal. And suffering is even though we all experience it, there's nothing inspiring about it. And so we tend, much of our life is trying to get away from it, or feel sorry for ourselves, or blame others for it. And so then this emphasis as a noble truth, as I've mentioned before, in contrast to, say, theistic religions, which start from a belief in the ultimate. And just notice right now, as you're sitting here, whether there's the ultimate reality, you can't conceive that really. Try to conceive the ultimate reality, but you can observe suffering. So it's something, that's recognizable. It's nothing esoteric or subtle. It's very obvious in itself. So the Buddha's emphasis on dukkha, where you use that as it's kind of the clue or the key to the door, because it's nothing mysterious about it, but it's changing from just reactivity against it to understanding it, and then it leads on to ultimate truth, amatta dhamma, paramatta satcha, or these words. So when you trying to conceive ultimate reality, then you get into difficult words like God, because to me, culturally, I was brought up as a Christian, so that word itself conveys an old man with a white beard up in the sky. Even though I know on one level that's very childish, but God tends to have qualities, like God the Father, God the Son, and so forth. These are qualities or conditions, attributes that get applied to ultimate reality. And the Buddha never did that. Ultimate reality can be recognized, but it has no attributes. It's not right or wrong, good or bad, red or blue, male or female. And so, your thinking process can't conceive that. It just goes blank, and it's trying to conceive the inconceivable is, an impossibility. So that's where mindfulness allows us to observe that, to discern, the difference. So then this word panya in Pali, the translation is discerning, which is not discriminating. When we use the word discrimination, then it's the thinking mind about this being bigger, smaller, right or wrong, and this is better than that. So this isn't as good as that. That's discrimination. Discernment. What is discernible in terms of panya is attachment and non-attachment. Say, when you're mindful, then you discern attachment is like this. So you're not saying anything about attachment is wrong, because as soon as you give it something like an adjectival condition, then it becomes more than that. So the important with mindfulness allows you to observe the results of attachment, to suffering, and to the causes of suffering. And then the attitude is letting go of the causes, and then you know as you trust your intuitive sense more, sati and panya together, then you can recognize non-attachment is like this. Or self, what is self? You know, the ego, the self-view, the sakkaya ditthi, or personality view is all built on words and concepts and attitudes and assumptions. So, you know, then when there's, you know, the self falls away when there's no words, and there's just awareness. And so you can discern anatta, or non-self, discern it from self, which is, you know, I, Ajahn, Sumedho, and so forth. And it becomes, you know, on a conventional level, there's nothing wrong with that, but ignorance and attachment to even my name is suffering, because I limit whatever condition I attach to. I'm bound into that condition, which is always a limitation and will always be a cause of suffering. So then the awakened consciousness of an individual and the discerning ability is then developed through, say, what we call meditation or bhavana in Pali. Bhavana is actually the Fourth Noble Truth, where you're cultivating the Eightfold Path from samadhi. And so that is translated as cultivating or developing this awareness, this sati and panya as you live your life, as a, you know, with the sitting, standing, walking, lying down postures, with the breathing, inhaling, exhaling, or you know, eating your food, putting on your robe, taking off your robe, you know, whatever, you know, just the daily routine that we use here, you know, whatever it amounts to, whether it's work or being alone or in a group, or whatever, the awareness, sati and panya, then we can discern that we're suffering. What are we attached to? So over the years, you know, in just integrating this bhavana into life, the flow of my life, I always use these noble truths as a constant reminder. So if I'm upset or anxious or worried or offended by something or somebody, you know, then I'm suffering. And then when I recognize there's suffering, then, you know, I know better than to blame somebody else. Even if they have been rude and nasty to me, I know that that's not the First Noble Truth. That's what they do to me, but the suffering I create around what somebody says to me. And so by tracing it to that, then I can, you know, I get to the cause and the development of non-attachment to that cause, letting go of the cause and non-attachment. So just to you know, see, because panya sometimes is used in wisdom, can be seen as a kind of discrimination, kind of high level of discrimination. But but this word discernment in English is where you can actually know the conditioned phenomena and the unconditioned. There's a discerning, a recognizing of it. And so the recognition then, you know, is where panya then can operate. And of course we recognize the non-suffering through non-attachment, non-self, shunyata, emptiness, nibbana, nirodha, all these words, unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. they're separate words with a slightly different emphasis, but they all amount to the same thing. So just to offer this as a reflection, because it's this teaching is very precise. It's not a fuzzy kind of vague path, the Buddha's path. It's not like a kind of I think, I'm not sure, maybe kind of thing, or it's very clear. But in order to see it clearly, the first three fetters are the obstruction. So, like for Sotapanna, the Sakyaditi, Silabhata Paramasa, Vicikicca are the obstruction to seeing that path. And so, I encourage you to really investigate these fetters, in your own mind, so that because it does deal with like Sakyaditi, which is probably like the ego or the self view, and in Silabhata Paramasa I use that concept for like just conditioning, like cultural conditioning, things that aren't particularly ego, but assumptions we make through the conditioning process we've acquired, culture, social identities, and that are part of assumptions, cultural assumptions we have, and that aren't particularly self, me and mine, but they're an attitude that is based on that it comes from ignorance and cultural conditioning. And then Vicikicca, doubt, is always the result of attachment to thinking. So one thing, like Zen Buddhism, they kind of perfected that koan style, which is a deliberate way to make you doubt. And so, because we are so bound into wanting to know answers, solve problems, and to have security of some sort, like this is the right way and that's wrong, and you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong, and then there's so many different views about meditation practice in Theravada. So you hear different teachers saying you've got to do this first, and then my method is the right one, and all the others are rubbish, or so there's you hear it in Thailand and then in the West, strong views about how to practice and what the right way to do it. And so, these oftentimes, these views come from teachers or people like scholars that seem to have a sense of authority and know what they're talking about. So that, I've been through this myself, so I know the effect it has on me. Like when an authority says you're wrong and you should do this, not that, then of course if I start operating from just reacting to it, then I'm back in Sakyaditi again, in doubt, or resentment, or being offended, or being critical of the person, or just observing, maybe these reactions, emotional reactions I have about somebody telling me I'm all wrong, is like this. And this you can know directly. It's not trying to justify your position or put anyone down, or say that they're wrong, or to argue the point, but to use the situation for knowing what you can know in the present. And so if somebody says something offensive to you, some rude statement that is wrong even, you get more benefit if you just look at your own, at the reaction, emotional reaction you have from that, and you begin, because then you're actually being mindful and discerning it in a way that is not being lost in just habitual reacting to the feeling of being offended or outraged by insulting remarks. This is in in daily life, like we have in monastic Vinaya. We're supposed to use right speech or proper speech, things like that. So it's not. We try our best to be responsible, but still, speech is one of the more difficult ones to control. But in the worldly life, they don't have such demands on you, so you can just say anything you want, and and things you hear, in the world are pretty awful, insults and blame. So, if you've ever listened to, like in England, the House of Commons, they record their sessions on Radio 4, BBC. And, for such a polite society, when these members of Parliament get together in the House of Commons, you wouldn't believe how arrogant and voracious and insulting and blaming. So to be a politician in England, you have to really have a tough heart, you can't be a wimp and get overwhelmed because somebody said you're a stupid idiot. You just but we can become so precious that we get sometimes we're over, like I see tendency in monasteries in England to be overly politically correct, to where you're trying to make everything not offensive to anyone, and that's the way the society kind of would like it, to just be terribly nice about everything, and that also has its problems, because messages don't get across, or people misunderstand, or you kind of never say anything that might upset somebody, so what's really important doesn't become very conscious for them. So this is just learning from experience, but you're the path itself, each one of you. It's here as a path, it's not out there or in me or somebody else. And this is what you learn from the way you are, and it doesn't matter, whether you're a really refined, good person or a coarse one, but whatever way you see yourself is what you learn from, because the discerning ability is non-critical. It's not about me as being right or wrong, but it's discerning the tendency to give myself, be critical of myself or of others, is like this. When I feel very critical of somebody else, then I can be aware. It's like I feel like this, I begin to observe this kind of feeling of bringing up this person's name, and then these kind of proliferations that I listen to it. So I begin to get a feeling for what it's like to dwell on my distaste for somebody is like this. And then you're observing it, you're discerning that it is what it is. Then you recognize, if I start grasping this and going along with it, then I get pulled into a whole kind of habit tendency of anger and blame and rage even. But if I observe it, then it's cultivating, it's bhavana. It's not just me trying to grin and bear it. It's actually using it, the first noble truth, second noble truth. Then this discerning ability is, I find, because we do, the sensual world is all dualistic. It's about birth and death. So everything we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, and feel has always its conditions, its attributes, its particular qualities, and of course, the Buddha summed it all up with the anicca, dukkha, anatta. All conditions are impermanent, so that because of the uncountable, infinite variety and conditioned phenomena that we have to experience all the time. How do you sort it out? How can you get any perspective on it? Because one condition, if you attach to this condition, a condition can't see another one. You're just bound into the limitation of the condition you're attached to. So then this non-attachment non-attachment like this, and then you have perspective on the conditions that you're experiencing, whether it's personal or external, whether it's through seeing what you see or hear, smell, taste, touch, think, or feel, whether it's personal or impersonal, good or bad, right or wrong. It's seen, it's discerned as sankhara, as conditioned phenomena, as all phenomena is changing. And that which is aware of phenomena is not that. That is the path and the unconditioned, unborn, uncreated. Through this awareness, sati, sampajanya. Sampajanya is like, it's intuitive, it embraces the moment, everything. It's not a critical thing where you're just focusing on one thing and dismissing the rest. But it allows us to, like we in English, we use the word usually like mindful when you drive the car, or when you're crossing the street, look both ways, and mindful when in this path because there's some stumps. And so we think of mindfulness always as being aware of a particular object or a difficult situation. But in sati sampajanya, that they combine in this present moment, which is our ability to embrace the totality of this moment with all the conditions still operating in it. But our relationship to this moment is no longer going from one thing to another, in terms of our like or preference or attraction or aversion, but to be the knower of it. It's like this. And so this is why, like, sampajanya allows this broad spectrum of total with all that is present, including the body, the breath, the posture, and all the conditions that are affecting you that are discernible in this present moment. And then and so this is a way of training oneself for this intuitive, for this awareness level that is liberating from birth and death. So you get beyond just the limitation of conditions of birth and death. Now you can't conceive that. It's an insight. It's not. You can't describe that, but you can recognize it through this sati sampajanya and discern, by investigating conditioned phenomena first, no longer from cultural biases or personal preferences, but just observing it as it really happens in the present, what arises, ceases. And then that, as you begin to pay more attention just to phenomena as you're experiencing it, it's no longer theoretical or philosophical or psychological. It's just like this. Then and using the Four Noble Truths as a kind of way of reminding yourself what to do with it, or not to do, then you have the insight into the path itself. And until you see through the three fetters, first three fetters, and then there's always doubt it's going to follow you around, wherever you go, whether you go off to a beautiful, peaceful mountaintop with devas bringing you Vindabhat food every day, or live in a slum in Bangkok or whatever, or anything in between. And then, if these fetters are still have never been recognized, then we're still subject to doubt. We're still thrown about. And you can see how in the story of the Buddha, in the scripture, the ascetic Gautama, Prince Siddhartha leaves the palace, becomes the ascetic Gautama, practices asceticism, develops powers, and all these, special qualities, special concentration abilities, and yet, at the end of the day, after 6 years of that, recognizing that there's still, this isn't it, this is not, it's still conditioned phenomena that is refined, but it's not the escape from suffering. And so then the insight that the Buddha had to become the Buddha was recognition not of concentrating the mind and refining conscious conditions in consciousness, but in opening everything up to reality in the present. And then his first sermon, of course, is the Four Noble Truths. So that is quite significant. It's a brilliant way of dealing with the human condition that we all share. It's not about being an ascetic for 6 years, or being, proficient in all the concentration practices, or having been a prince, royal family, or anything like that. It's about the common reality that we share with all creatures, in fact, with the animal kingdom and what. But with the human have this reflective Buddha mind. You might call it a Buddha mind. We can actually reflect on ourselves. We're not just conditioned by the forms we're in. We're not just helplessly caught in instinctual patterns of behavior according to our species. We can actually contemplate the species, through sati sampajanya, satipanya. The human side, being human, is like this. Now, I don't think animals can do that. Like the cats at Amaravati, and get them to contemplate what is it like to be a cat. What do you feel like when you kill a bird? They never quite register. But, if we kill a bird, what do you feel like? They can say that, and then you would, you could observe maybe guilt or remorse or whatever through some kind of cruel action you commit. And so this is like the reflective mind, the Buddha nature, they use these words, but it's the ability that, like, to be able to observe, be the Buddha, the knower of the world, rather than just a creature caught in the karmic condition of form that is conscious and just operating through the momentum of karma and conditioning. So I'll stop here.